Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. You know those empty shelves in the dairy aisle? Yeah, we're talking about the egg shortage, and I'm sure it's hit all of us in the breakfast bowl lately. We're going to try to really get to the bottom of this today.
Right.
We've got an interesting article here from FreightWaves, which is a publication focused on all things freight and logistics. And believe it or not, this egg shortage is actually tied to trucking regulations. So we're going to dive into that and try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's not just your breakfast that's being affected. Think about all the baked goods, all the cakes and cookies, restaurants, and even manufacturers. So many products use eggs, and so when there's a shortage like this, it really ripples through the whole industry.
It really does. And yeah, the article mentions some pretty alarming price increases. I mean, some places seeing eggs going for over $10 a dozen. $10 for a dozen eggs. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. I know I've noticed the price difference at the checkout for sure. So how did we even get here?
Well, the main culprit here is something called highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI for short. And basically, this has been decimating chicken flocks since early 2022. And it's still a major issue. We're seeing it in the USDA's market report, so that's the big problem.
So it's like a really, really bad chicken flu that's been going around for a while now.
Exactly. It's highly contagious, and it can just wipe out entire flocks. It spreads so quickly, so you can imagine the impact this has had on egg production.
Yeah, it's not just like a few isolated cases either.
Yeah.
The USDA report mentions that there were outbreaks still happening in February this year. Like there was even a first case in Pennsylvania. So it seems like this is pretty widespread.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It is a regional issue. So the areas that are hit hardest by this HPAI are seeing those really, really severe shortages and those price jumps. So depending on where you are, you might be feeling the egg squeeze more than others.
So what's being done about this? Well, the article talks about a pretty interesting approach. The government's turning to truckers for help. Can you believe that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, or FMCSA, they've issued an emergency declaration to try and speed things up?
Yeah, this is a very targeted effort, and it focuses on easing the hours of service regulations for truckers that are specifically hauling live chickens. And it's specifically those who are moving birds out of areas that have been really, really hard hit by HPAI.
So, okay, for those of us who don't spend a lot of time thinking about trucking regulations, what exactly does that mean? What are these hours of service regulations, and why are they being loosened?
So normally there are very, very strict limits on how long a truck driver can be on the road every day and every week. Imagine driving one of those huge trucks for 11 hours straight. You'd be exhausted, right? So these rules are in place to prevent driver fatigue and to prevent accidents. But in an emergency situation like this, these rules can actually slow down efforts to move those chickens to safer areas.
So it's like a strategic chicken relocation program. Get them out of the HPAI hotspots and hopefully stop the virus from spreading even further.
Exactly. And it's not just at the federal level either. The article mentions that states like California, Iowa, Louisiana, they've all issued similar waivers recently, which just shows how widespread this HPAI problem has become.
Sounds like everyone's really trying to work together to contain this thing before the egg supply just completely vanishes.
Yeah. The hope is that by making it easier to transport these birds, the government can help to stabilize the supply chain and eventually, hopefully, bring those egg prices back down. But of course, it's not just a free-for-all. There are still some safety measures in place.
So they're not just giving truckers permission to drive around the clock with a truck full of chickens, right? What does the article say about the specific conditions for this waiver?
Well, for one thing, the truckers need to have all the necessary approvals and confirmed delivery locations before they even hit the road. They can't just be, driving around aimlessly with a truckload of chickens. Also, they're allowed to drive up to 16 hours in a 24-hour period, but all driving has to stop at midnight each day.
So no powering through on just coffee and willpower?
Nope, definitely not. There's a mandatory 6-hour break in there, and they have to use what's called a sleeper berth. It's basically like a little bedroom in the truck, and it's designed to make sure that they are getting some proper rest before they get back on the road.
Okay, so it sounds like there's still a lot of oversight to make sure that they're not just, throwing safety out the window just because there's this emergency waiver in place. What else does the article say about the specifics for this?
Well, they also have to keep really, really detailed records of all their driving hours. And of course, they still have to have a valid commercial driver's license. And they can't be under any other, driving restrictions. It's a very targeted and temporary measure to really address a critical need. But they're making sure that safety is still a top priority.
And speaking of temporary, how long is this waiver actually going to be in effect? Is this a permanent change to those trucking regulations?
Oh, no, not at all. It's set to expire on March 10th, 2025. unless the emergency ends sooner. So it's definitely a short-term fix to try to, get a handle on this egg shortage while they're working on those longer-term solutions.
So it sounds like we've got this nationwide egg shortage, obviously driven by this really contagious bird flu, and the government is stepping in with this, temporary Band-Aid to those trucking regulations. But this is really just addressing the symptom here,
Right.
I mean, moving chickens around might help in the short term, but it doesn't really get to the root cause of the issue.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point. This waiver is really focused on the logistics of how do we get chickens to where they need to be, but it doesn't actually solve the underlying problem of HPAI itself.
So what happens after March 10th?
Mm.
If this virus is still spreading and flocks are still getting infected, what does the article suggest as like a long-term solution to this?
That's where the article kind of falls short. It really focuses in on the specific FMCSA response, and it doesn't really delve too deeply into those bigger picture solutions for how do we prevent future outbreaks or how do we, tackle this HPAI problem head on.
Kind of a cliffhanger there.
Yeah.
So it seems like they're scrambling to mitigate this, immediate shortage. But the long-term outlook for eggs is still well a bit scrambled. It makes you wonder what this means to the future,
Yeah.
not just for egg prices, but for our food supply in general.
I think that's a really crucial point to consider. This situation really highlights how complex and interconnected our food systems are. You've got animal health, you've got transportation, you've got government regulations, you've got consumer demand. All these pieces have to work together. And when one piece goes haywire, it can really have this domino effect throughout the whole system.
Makes you realize how much we take for granted. I mean, I never thought I'd see the day when eggs were considered a luxury item, It's a good reminder that all those like simple things that we see on the grocery store shelves, they're often the result of these incredibly intricate systems that are working behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And when those systems get disrupted, it can have a very real impact on our daily lives and on our wallets.
Speaking of wallets, $10 dozen eggs aren't really feasible for everyone. This temporary fix might help bring prices down a bit, but what if this HPI just keeps speeding? Could we see even higher prices? Or, shortages of other poultry products?
Yeah.
What if chicken wings suddenly become like a delicacy?
It's certainly a possibility. And that's why this issue is something that we should be paying attention to. It's not just about the eggs. It's about the resilience of our food supply as a whole and how vulnerable it can be to things like disease outbreaks and transportation disruptions.
So it seems like while moving chickens around is a clever tactic in the short term, we really need to be thinking about those more long-term solutions as well. What about, vaccine development for HPAI or new biosecurity measures to try to prevent these outbreaks from happening in the first place? Those seem like critical areas to invest in if we want to ensure a stable and affordable food supply.
Absolutely. This situation really underscores the importance of ongoing research and development in those areas. We can't just rely on these reactive measures like this trucking waiver. We need those proactive strategies to prevent future outbreaks and really safeguard our food systems.
So we've gone from, empty egg cartons to the complexities of global food security. It's pretty amazing how one seemingly simple item can really reveal so much about the world around us.
It really is. It reminds us that even something as basic as an egg can be impacted by this whole web of factors, from animal health to government policies to the truck drivers, that are working so hard to keep our supply chains moving.
It's a reminder that we're all connected in ways that we might not always realize, and that the choices that we make, whether it's supporting sustainable farming practices or being more mindful about our consumption habits, those choices can actually ripple outwards and have a much bigger impact than we might think.
I couldn't agree more. This egg shortage might seem like a temporary inconvenience, but it's a really powerful illustration of how interconnected we all are and how much we depend on each other for something as fundamental as our food.
All right, so we've really cracked open this egg shortage today, and it's way more than just yolk. But before we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you want to leave with our listener? What's like the golden nugget of wisdom they can carry with them long after this deep dive is over?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that we really can't take our food supply for granted. This egg shortage, it's kind of a wake-up call, I think. It reminds us that even the most basic items can be affected by these unexpected events. And it really encourages us to think about, where our food comes from, what are the challenges that people in the food industry face, and how can we make those systems more resilient in the long run?
Yeah, it definitely makes you think twice the next time you're at the grocery store looking at a carton of eggs,
Yeah.
It's so easy to just go about our daily routines and forget about those complex systems that are bringing that food to our tables.
Exactly. And this shortage, it's not just about eggs. It's about understanding that these disruptions can happen anywhere along that supply chain. And those disruptions can have far-reaching consequences.
So as our listeners are heading to the grocery store, maybe with a little more knowledge about the egg situation and a little more anxiety about what they might find in the dairy aisle, what's the one question you want to leave them with? Something to really ponder as they're navigating those potentially empty shelves and, trying to figure out their budgets.
I would ask them to consider this. What can we do as individuals and as a society to try to build a more robust and a more sustainable food system? Can we make changes in our own consumption habits to reduce waste and support those sustainable farming practices? Can we advocate for policies that prioritize animal welfare and disease prevention? This egg shortage
Yeah.
might be a temporary crisis, but it's a reminder that the choices that we make today are going to shape the future of our food.
That's a powerful question, and one that really deserves a lot of thought. It's easy to feel kind of helpless when you're facing these large-scale challenges, but you're right, even small changes can make a difference. And it all starts with awareness and a willingness to engage with these issues. Well, thanks for guiding us through this deep dive today. I think we've all learned a lot more than we expected about the humble egg and the surprisingly intricate world that it represents.
It's been my pleasure. It's always fascinating to really explore these complex issues and kind of unpack those hidden connections that shape the world around us.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective on the food that we eat and the systems that bring it to our tables. Maybe you'll even be inspired to, learn more about sustainable food practices or try some egg-free recipes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.